Good evening, friends. If you're able to hear me and if you're able to see me, then please raise your hands. So let's get started. Good evening, friends. In today's session, we are again going to take up some topics related to sociology. And before we go into the topics, I just have some admin announcements. Just we'll go through that. Right. So in case you need some help with regards to preparation strategy, the link is here. In case you need some help with answer writing, it is here. The session that we're having right now is recorded and it will be uploaded soon, very fast. And again, in case you need any help, any mentorship related help, then you can always contact us. So let's move to the topics that we are going to take up today. Now, these are the topics. Already you have the handouts, but I'll just give you a brief idea about what we're going to talk about and why we are going to talk about all these things. Right? Those who were in the last session, I think you have a fair idea what's the whole purpose behind having these sessions. Right? For something that I mentioned in the last session. Now, let's try to connect it with these topics. So the first topic that we're going to take up is middle class in India. Now, how is this relevant from your exam perspective? Right? In exam, if you look at the sociology paper, in paper 1, we have systems of social stratification. There is one topic. And again, in that you understand how the society is stratified. Right? Class is one of those ways by which society is stratified. So this is here. If you look at paper 2, there is one topic which is referred to as middle classes. Right? So that is what we are going to talk about. Now you might have a question. This is something that you would have already studied when you are looking at when you're going through the tab videos, right? Why are we having this discussion here? Now, see, this entire concept about middle class, it has been in the news, right? Especially due to the pandemic. Because of the pandemic, the different sections of the society have been impacted. Middle class has been disproportionately impacted. There are some studies which point out that maybe the Indian middle class has shrunk. So the people who are in the middle classes, maybe they have become poorer. They are no longer in the middle classes. Apart from that, time and again, there have been multiple reports which point out that the size of Indian middle class is not huge. Right? So we will try to understand that. How large is Indian middle class? What has been the impact of the pandemic on the Indian middle class? So this is what we are going to take up. This is something which is timely. The next topic, caste in 21st century, competing narratives. Now the entire discussion will be based on one paper which was published in EPW. Now why are we taking this paper? Why are we discussing this paper? Now something like caste is extremely important to understand in society. And if you look at your syllabus, paper 1, paper 2, both talk about this. On top of that, if you just take any year's question paper, you will find something related to caste. And apart from that, look at our own social discourse. Every day you will find some news related to caste. And it's not just news. When you're talking with people around you, somehow or other, topics related to caste come up. And what usually happens? There are different viewpoints related to caste. There are different narratives related to caste. So what we will try to do here is, we will look at all these different kinds of viewpoints. What are these competing narratives? And what we will do is we'll do an analysis of that. For example, there can be one competing narrative which says that caste is nothing but status groups arranged in a hierarchy. We'll analyze it, how far this is correct. Also, we'll try to analyze whether in present situation this holds ground. So this paper that was published, it actually does an empirical analysis. They take data of government data and they try to analyze how far some of these things which the thinkers have talked about is true in the present context. So different interpretation of caste and how good they are, whether they hold true. That is what we are going to take up. The next topic is valuing women's work. Some of you will be thinking, obviously we should value women's work, right? If women are working, why should we not value it? No, we are not talking about that. We are trying to understand what is the value of women's work within the households. Housewives, for example, right? So they work within the household. They provide, they take care of multiple things. Right? They will be cooking, they will be cleaning, they will be taking care of the children. How much is the value of that? And again, if there is a value, if you are able to find a value for that work, should we be compensating women for that? Now, why is this relevant? There have been some states recently, like the recent elections, which mentioned that women are being unpaid, women who are working within the household, right? They're not paid for that work. If they've had work outside, similar kind of services, if they had toilet outside, they would have earned money. But since they are providing the services within the household, they don't get anything, they don't get paid for that. So they should be provided some form of compensation. This is what some states, some political parties in certain states before the elections promised, that we will come up with different kinds of schemes. So what we will do is we will analyze this. Should women be compensated for the unpaid work that they're providing within households? If this is done, then what will be the implications of that? Will there be some positive impact? Will there be a negative impact? All these things. Also, we'll try to think of what can go wrong in this process. So this is what the topic is about. The next one, patterns of marriage dissolution in India. Over a period of time, the attitude of people towards marriage has been changing. Societies change, economy change, education levels change, awareness change. As a result of which, whatever is people's perception towards different institutions changes. So people's perception about marriage also is changing. It might lead to a situation where marriages are breaking down. There's dissolution of marriage. So what we will do is we will refer to certain recent literature which try to understand what are some of the trends in marriage dissolution. And again, this is also on the basis of a paper which was published in EPW. The last one, division of labor. Now, this is something which is kind of evergreen. At any point of time, you can get a question related to division of labor. Different thinkers have analyzed division of labor. Durkheim, Marx, others also have thought about division of labor and they have their own perspective. And mind you, it is not just sociologists who have talked about division of labor. You also have economists talking about division of labor. You also have people from other sections, right? People who are, let's say, studying human resources, management, they also talk about division of labor. So what is the meaning of division of labor? What is the interpretation of division of labor? How different viewpoints are there about division of labor? This is what we take up. Now, this is something which is important from the examination perspective. You can always get questions from something like division of labor. So as a concept, I will just explain it, right? It is kind of recap. So what I'm planning to do is every session, one or two concepts we'll take up and we will recap it or we will revisit it. And then some other concepts we'll take up and we will link it with the present circumstances. So as you can see, right, all these topics are relevant. In some cases, the society has changed and what is the impact. In some cases, because of the COVID, how this has changed the dimensions here. Topic like caste is evergreen. Valuing women works, again, has been in the news because of elections in different states. So let's try to understand each of these topics one by one in details. And we will follow this particular order. So first topic, middle class in India. I can see some hands being raised. Yeah, those who have just raised their hands, please lower it. Yeah. So how is this relevant? I already mentioned, right? Middle classes have been in the news. The impact of the pandemic on the middle classes has been in the news. So in the next few minutes, what we are going to do is, we'll first understand who are the middle classes, right? We look at some of the traditional definitions. Then we will try to understand what is the size of the Indian middle class. Third thing that we will do is we'll try to differentiate between Indian middle class and the middle class which possibly emerged in Europe and the Western countries. And the last part will be what is the impact of the pandemic on the middle classes. But before I start, I just want to show you one image. This is from the magazine The Economist, and this again is not a very recent photo. Maybe it is like 2-3 years old, right? I think 2018 or 19 it was published. And this basically shows you one thing, right? Basically there are 3 different bars. This is one bar, this is another bar, this is another bar. What they're saying is, if you look at the upper layers of social hierarchy, right, those who are in the upper classes maybe, right, you have some people. Then there are some people who are at the bottom, who are extremely poor, lower classes. And what they're saying is, in the middle, you don't have a lot of people. It's kind of invisible. So what they're saying is, the Indian middle class is missing. This is what the economists had interpreted. There was another research, I mean, that is again a recent research, Pew research. They also have some similar kind of viewpoint. They also say that in case of India, the middle class is very small. 95% of people are in lower income category. So if out of 100 people, 95% are in the lower income category, how many will be middle class, how many will be upper class, right? It will be very, very small. So that is another interpretation. But then there are other studies which say that the Indian middle class is comparatively larger. 36%, some will say 33%, again some will give different numbers, 280 million, 360 million. Now, the question is, how come there is so much variation in these estimates? How come someone is saying it is hardly 2%, 3%, while some others are saying it is 36% of the entire population? Now, this is one interesting observation, and I want you to think about it. See, when you are trying to understand society, what you are trying to do here? You are trying to create certain categories, you are trying to define things, you are trying to classify things. The way you are defining things, the way you are classifying things, the way you are understanding a thing, that will decide the boundaries. Accordingly, the sizes will vary. So your counting will depend on how you are defining things. If your definition changes, the number changes. And as a result of which, you will find massive variations. And in fact, you can go back one step. You can actually question, why are we classifying things? Societal reality. Society is extremely complex. How do you make sense of society? One of the ways by which you can make sense of the society is divide it into parts. How do you divide it into parts? You are trying to find out certain parameters which unify a part. You are trying to find out certain parameters by which you can distinguish one part from another. And that way, you can possibly make sense. I'll give you an example. There are a lot of animals, birds, right, around you. How do you understand this? How do you understand the whatever animal plant kingdom that is around you? Here also you will make different kinds of classifications. Right, again, mammals, birds, right, reptiles, there are multiple variations. And again, you use certain characteristics on the basis of this you make classification, and then, let's say you make a classification and you find out let's say this is the characteristics of mammals. Right, again, within that you will again find different other characteristics and you try to understand that. Within reptiles, again, you can find out different characteristics, again you will understand that. Same thing applies here. To understand society, again you find out different characteristics by which you can classify it. Maybe it is on the basis of status, maybe it is on the basis of power, maybe it is on the basis of wealth criteria, class. So to make sense out of the reality, societal reality, which is very complex, you try to break it into parts. That is what you are doing. And who are the upper classes, who are the lower classes? It is easy to identify. Someone who is extremely rich, someone who is extremely poor, you can find out. But who are in the middle? Where do you create those boundaries to understand middle becomes difficult. That's the reason you have different interpretation of middle classes. Now let's look at some of the traditional definition of who constitutes the middle class. Anthony Giddens says the middle class is based on the possession of educational and technical qualifications. Those people who have some educational qualifications, those people who have some technical qualifications, lawyers, doctors, engineers, chartered accountants, right? So they are the middle classes, according to Anthony Giddens. Mariam Aslani again looks at middle classes from the Indian perspective and says that in case of India, middle class is a fluid category. Fluid, something which keeps on flowing, something which keeps on changing its shape. So middle class is a fluid category. Why? The number of people in the middle class keeps on changing. Some people will enter into the middle class, some people will move out of middle class. Constantly moving in, constantly moving out. Why? Because of the precarious nature of work in India. Large section of Indian labor force is in the informal sector. No social safety, no social safeguards. So some people, again, they might do well, they might enter into the middle classes. But one health issue in the entire family, they're back to the lower classes. Right? So again, in recent times, I heard someone saying, I don't remember who said that, the Indian middle class is just one medical issue, health issue away from being in the lower classes. Right? If there is major health issue, you're back to the lower class. So this is getting reflected in Mariam Aslami's work. Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, which constitutes of the developed economies. Now they have also some definition of middle classes, classification of middle classes. They're saying that those who are earning between $10 to $100 per day, adjusted for purchasing power parity, they are in the middle classes. This is what OECD says. So there are different interpretations. And in case of India, there have been different kinds of estimates to understand who are the middle classes. Again, not necessarily they're all government estimates. Different researchers, economists, sociologists, anthropologists, they have tried to estimate it. Right? So this is an example of it. I don't want you to remember all these things, right? That's not the point. I just wanted to show an image. I just wanted to show you how the numbers will vary if you are changing the parameters. And this is just half of the total number of significant estimates, right? There are some more estimates here. So just look at this last column here. Right? Some estimates say that 374 million in India are middle class. Some say 380 million are middle class. Some say 270 million are in the middle classes. Again, they have taken different parameters. Some have taken house ownership, land ownership, income levels. Some have just taken income levels, $11 to $100. This is the next page. According to this estimate, 600 million will be in the middle classes in 2012. The estimates were done before that. While there is another estimate which says 70 million were in the middle class in 2010. So what I want to point here is the way you define things, accordingly, your measures will change. Right? So when you are looking at any estimate, numbers, right? Try to figure out what all they have taken into consideration. If I'm saying $10 to $20 is the earning for being in the middle class, and if I'm saying $50 to $100 is the income to be in the middle class, the numbers will definitely be different. Right? $50 to $100, very few people will be having that much amount of money. Right? So this is just for your reference, how the number of people in the middle classes changes. Now let's, I've already mentioned this, the Pew research, it says only 2% of the country are in the middle class, and globally 13% are in the middle class. And it is saying that 95% of India is poor. So if 95% is poor, remaining 5%, some will be in the middle class and some will be in the upper classes, right? So the number is extremely tiny. Now let's see how the middle class's emergence in Europe has been different from the emergence of middle classes in India. So how did the middle class emerge in Europe? See, the western part of Europe, you had the feudal society. There were feudal lords, there were feudal serfs. Over a period of time, there is emergence of the new industrial class. Right? So they are the ones who are now trying to get in capital, they are now trying to set up industries. Right? So a new class is emerging. That class, when it was emerging, was referred to as the middle class. But over a period of time, the feudal society is now changing to an industrial society. So over a period of time, you now have two poles. One is those who are working in factories, the laborers. At the other end, you have the industrialists, the capitalists. So now the idea of middle class is changing. Those who are now between the capitalists and the laborers, they are now referred to as the middle classes. So initially, the new industrial class, initially that was the case, the new industrial class, the new bourgeois, they were referred to as the middle classes. But over a period of time, the class which exists between the industrialists and the laborers and the working classes, right, they were referred to as the middle class. So basically the skilled professionals. Right, in many places you'll find engineers, right, those kind of professions. They were the middle classes. So this is how middle classes emerged in Europe. But in case of India, this is not the case. Industrialization is not happening in India like this. In case of India, the middle classes are emerging as a result of contact with the Britishers. Right, so under the patronage of the colonial rulers. So the Britishers are coming to India. Certain people, certain communities are providing different services to the Britishers. For example, merchants, traders, right, accountants, they're all providing different kinds of services to the Britishers. And gradually they are now becoming the middle classes. Over a period of time, the Britishers are now focusing on mass education, English education, mass education. It also leads to emergence of different professional classes. Lawyers, teachers, professors, engineers, right? So they are now becoming part of the middle classes. Apart from that, the British are also setting up different kind of administrative mechanisms, right? For example, they're setting up the civil services, the police services, judicial services, etc. Apart from that, they are also setting up railway networks. All these things are leading to emergence of a middle class in case of India. So in Europe, it was a result of industrialization. In case of India, it is slightly different, under the patronage of the British. But one thing has to be noted, the middle class that is emerging in India is playing a very significant role in the political arena. Many of the political leaders, the freedom fighters, they emerged from the middle classes. Be it Mahatma Gandhi, Bal Gangadhar Tilak, Gopal Krishna Gokhale, all of them. Right? So they had roots in the middle classes. So this is how the middle class is emerging in the Indian context. Now, after independence, what is the story? After independence, the middle class is now getting consolidated. More and more members are getting entry into the middle class. How is it so? See, in 1960s, we are adopting some new agricultural technology, right? You all know about it. Green revolution. Because of green revolution, what happens? You are using high yield variety seeds. It leads to increase in production. It leads to increase in productivity. Right? So those who were the landed farmers, they are now having surplus. They are now having higher incomes, right? As compared to those who were landless. Right? So now they are the ones who are entering into the middle class. Right? So the land owning sections, they are becoming richer. And this has been again documented by political scientists like Rajni Kodri. Apart from green revolution, another thing that happens is economic development. Different policies of the government, be it land reforms, be it public sector, be it the setting up public sector units, all these things, they are leading to economic development. Obviously, I mean, I'm not saying that the country's economic growth was very high, but it was getting economically developed as compared to what the situation was before 1947. So there is economic development, as a result of which people in the rural areas, their aspirations is changing. They are now moving towards urban areas. They also now want to take up different kinds of urban occupations. There is movement of people from rural to urban areas. There is preference for urban occupations. So this also leads to, again, the consolidation of the middle classes. More and more people are now entering the middle classes. On top of that, there were some policies from the side of the government. Affirmative action policies, positive discrimination policies, reservation policies, basically. So these policies were targeted towards Dalit members, scheduled castes, scheduled tribes. It leads to creation of middle classes among Dalits and scheduled tribes as well. So all these things, all these policies, rural development, economic development, and government policies, it is leading to change in the middle classes. Now, this is how the middle classes have, over a period of time, developed in the Indian context. And again, after the 1991 reforms, this has again further increased, right? New economic opportunities, white collar jobs, globalization, all these things have led to the development of the middle class. In recent times, there have been different articles which analyze the impact of the pandemic on the middle classes. So what we will do is we will look at the different ways by which the middle classes got impacted. So one by one, each point we will take up. First is, see, within middle classes also, it's not that everyone is same. Just now we saw the OECD definition, for example. So $10 to $100 per day, everyone is, according to that definition, everyone is middle class. But do you think those who are earning $10 and those who are earning $100, do you think they are equal? No. So $10 is like 1/10 of $100, right? So within middle class also, you have classification. Some will be upper middle class, some will be middle class, and some will be lower middle class. During the pandemic, how was the upper middle class impacted? See, in exam, you can get these questions. You can get a question. Analyze the impact of COVID-19 pandemic on the middle classes. So how do you do that? Right? You have to break it into parts. What was the impact on earnings, maybe? What was the impact on employment opportunities? Right? What was the impact on women among the middle classes? What is the impact on their health access? What is the impact on their education? Right? So if you divide it like this, you will get points. That is what we are trying to do. So first is, how will the upper middle class be impacted? First question is, who are the upper middle class? Most likely people who have cushion jobs, right? Who are not very vulnerable, who have some form of job security. Maybe those who work with the government, or those who are getting pensions from the government, those who are working with big private organizations, multinational corporations. Right? So these people will be in the upper middle classes. Now during the pandemic, these people who are in the upper middle class, just think of it, right? Will they be impacted by the lockdowns? Will they be impacted by the confinement measures? Most likely not. Right? Maybe they will have work from home facilities if they're working in private organizations. If they're working in government organizations, again, the salaries are not going to go down. They will not be thrown out of job. In large scale MNCs also, they will have some form of cushioning effect, right? They will also not throw anyone just like that. So those who would have been in the upper middle class, they are not as vulnerable. They would be protected by these organizations. They might also be protected by the state. In fact, in some cases, they might have benefited. Some of the private firms specifically did really well during the time of the pandemic. Some sectors. For example, e-commerce, logistics, edutech, right? These are the sectors which did really well. So those who would have been working in these sectors, they would have seen an increase in incomes. Just think of the number of these delivery apps and other things which came up during the pandemic, right? It increased drastically because they were profitable. So those who would have been in the upper middle class, they would have been spared from the worst impacts. Some of them might have even benefited. Now let's look at the impact on the lower middle class. Now think of it, who will be in the lower middle class? See, those who will be small business owners, those who work in different service industries, those who are self-employed, teachers in private schools, colleges, they are in the lower middle class. Now, how does the pandemic impact them? Many of the people here, they are dependent on, their earnings are dependent on demand for the services that they are providing. For example, a small business owner, his earning is exactly dependent on the service, on the demand for his services. For example, if you're running a restaurant, maybe a small restaurant, small eating outlet, your incomes are completely dependent on how many people will consume food from you. But during the pandemic, what will happen? Most likely, people would not have consumed food. I mean, they would not have gone to these outlets and consumed food. They would have consumed food at their home. Hotels and restaurants, they all got massively impacted by this. Social distancing measures and all these things you have to follow. So those who are in the lower middle class, they are disproportionately negatively impacted. The demand for their services would have gone down. They're extremely vulnerable. They will not be having any social security measures. In fact, their situation might have been worse than those who would have been in the lower classes. In the lower classes, at least the government recognizes that you are worse impacted and the government will provide some income support, government might provide some food support. Those who are in the lower middle classes, the government might not even consider it. So if you are at the bottom, some form of social security benefits will be there. But if you are in the lower middle classes, maybe you don't get any of these things. And yes, also many of them will be working in informal sector, unorganized sector, right? They would have been thrown out of jobs. So upper middle class, they got cushioned from the impact of pandemic, but the lower middle class, they were worse impacted. Now what about the impact on women from the middle classes? Something that we have previously discussed. See, when the economy does well, women are hired. If the economy doesn't do well, women are fired first. Women are considered to be the reserve army of labor. So during the pandemic, obviously the economy contracted. So high prevalence of job losses among women. On top of that, different studies pointed out increased in domestic violence. Confinement measures and all those things, more time with their abusers, chances of domestic violence increased. Apart from that, they had to carry out high workloads at home. What about the impact on education among middle classes? See, because of the pandemic, the schools could not operate as expected. And this is something that we discussed last session as well. Now, among the middle classes, again, the upper middle class, right? They will be sending their kids to maybe private schools, good schools, and they also have different resources at their disposal. Maybe they have access to proper internet connection, they have multiple devices, a tablet, a phone, a laptop, etc. Those who are in the lower middle classes, they might not have access to these things. So because of the pandemic, education is changing. The way education is being imparted has changed. Kids in the upper middle classes, right? They would have access to virtual learning facilities. But kids who are in the lower middle classes, they would have been pushed out of the system. This can lead to increase in inequalities in future, right? So again, not everyone is equally impacted. What about impact on employment? So there was one study by Center for Monitoring Indian Economy, CMI. In the month of May 2021, they said that 1 crore Indians have been rendered jobless during the second wave of the pandemic. Imagine, 1 crore Indians, huge number. So this is something which is scary. And job losses were typically among the lower middle classes. No social security, no safeguards, right? Most of them would be either small business owners or they will be working in different service sectors, right? So the lower middle classes is facing the brunt here. Now, there was this Pew Research Center study, and they are also pointing in the same direction. What they're saying is, whatever was the size of the middle class before the pandemic, the size of the middle class has shrunk because of the pandemic. They're saying that 32 million were thrown out of the middle class because of the pandemic. So the size was X. Now the size of the middle class is X minus 32 million. So many people were pushed into poverty. They're now in the low income category. And this is basically the illustration. I mean, I'm not sure whether it is visible to you or not. I'm just giving you an idea here. So this is India, this is China, right? So what they're saying is, because of the pandemic, how at different income levels, the division of India is changing. For example, those who are poor, their number is increasing by 75 million. So previously, let's say X people were poor. Now you have X plus 75 million in the poor category. In case of low income, previously, let's say Y people were in the low income category. Now Y plus 35 million people are, Y minus 35 million people are in the low income category. Middle classes, 32 million are thrown out of the middle classes. Right? So there is a massive shrinking of the middle class because of the pandemic. This is again from the same study that you. What they're saying is, I'm writing it here. It was expected that the size of the middle class in India would have been 99 billion if the pandemic was not there. But the size of the middle class is 66 million. The size of the middle class has shrunk because of the pandemic. That is what they are saying. Those who are in the poor category, it has increased drastically. So this is one very important observation. Those who are in that middle income, middle class category, it is now shrinking because of the pandemic. And again, there are other evidences to point the same thing. If you look at the demand for NREGA, Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act, according to that, work is allocated, right? That has increased. More people are demanding NREGA work. And it is at an all-time high. In the last 14 years, this much amount for NREGA work was not there. Right? It basically points out that now more people are dependent on NREGA. Ideally, over a period of time, less people should be dependent on NREGA and they should get some proper jobs. But that is what is not happening. Right? So this is something which we need to be worried about. So this is what I wanted to discuss here. Who are the middle classes? Why finding out who are middle classes is difficult? What are the different trends or different kinds of interpretation of middle class? How the middle classes in India, how the emergence of middle class in India is different from the emergence of middle class in Europe? And lastly, what is the impact of the pandemic on the middle classes? This part is very important, can be asked in Sociology paper 2. So this is about the first topic, the middle classes. What kind of questions you can expect? These kind of things, like what is the impact of the pandemic on the middle classes? Also, you can get questions like why estimating the size of the middle classes is different? What are the different sociological interpretations of middle classes? What are the different kinds of economic interpretation of the middle classes? These kind of classifications can also be asked. Now, the next topic, caste in 21st century competing narratives. Now, this topic I will spend significant amount of time because through this topic, we will revise multiple interpretation of caste that we have already studied. Right? If you have understood caste or if you have read caste, this will be kind of a revision. And if you have not studied caste till now, the next few minutes, right, it will help you get a bird's eye view of caste, bird's eye view of the caste system. Right? Before we go to that, in case you have any question, Narega is National Rural Employment Guarantee Act. Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act. It is a right to job scheme. According to the scheme, those who are in the rural areas, they are entitled to 100 days of work in one financial year. It's not that everyone is entitled. In one household, one person is entitled to 100 days of work. Purna Jay, why poll question is not given? Good question. Sociology, we don't have any objective questions because it is mains exam. Mains exam, only subjective questions are there. Right? So keep this in mind. You will not get any objective questions anywhere in your UPSC preparation related to sociology. Yeah, Abhilash asks, in India, how middle class is measured? I already showed you different interpretations of middle class. Mind you, from the side of government, you don't have these kind of classifications, that who is upper class, who is lower class, who is middle class. It's not something that is carried out by the government. Who does all these things? Maybe some economists, maybe some sociologists, maybe some political scientists. They are doing it for their own understanding. From the side of the government, you don't measure who are the middle classes. Private firms also try to measure all these things because sometimes they have to target products. They have to create those segments, right? If I'm creating a car, right, what is my potential target category? So they will also do these analysis, right? But from the side of the government, these classifications are not there. Why are we concerned about middle class? Because that's there in your syllabus. That's why we are concerned, and middle class was disproportionately affected because of the pandemic. So this is a question by Sunita. Some of you have asked about what could be the potential mains question, right? I'm just again repeating it. I already mentioned it once. One question can be, what is the impact of the pandemic on the middle classes, right? In India, that can be one question. There can be another question, why is it difficult to define who are the middle classes? Another question can be, what is the difference between the emergence of middle classes in India and Europe? Right? These kind of questions can be asked. Now let's move to caste question, caste topic. So what is the background to this? What is the background and what we are going to take up? See, almost on a regular basis, you will come across the concept of caste, right? And again, caste is something which is there in our society. If you have to understand Indian society, you have to understand caste. But now, there are different interpretations of caste. Those who have already studied stratification, those who have already studied caste system, will relate to it. Right? Some thinkers will say it is functional, some will say it is no, it is not functional. Again, within those schools also there are again different thoughts. So how do we understand these things? Which strand of thought is backed by evidence, which is not backed by evidence? Also, many of these viewpoints, right? Thinkers who have given these viewpoints at some point of time, maybe 50 years back, 60 years back. Do these viewpoints hold ground in the present context? That also we need to think about. So what we are going to do is, we are going to refer to this particular paper. Those who have EPW subscription, right? If you want to, you can refer to this paper. Caste in 21st Century, Competing Narratives. This paper has been authored by two professors from University of Maryland, Sonal Desai, and Amresh Dubey from JNU. Now, what they have done, they have considered some 4 different narratives about caste. What caste is all about? Caste is a system of inequality. Caste is a social construct. Caste is a status hierarchy. So, different kinds of competing narratives are there. What is narrative? Again, different kinds of narration, different ways by which people connect different events and they will come to a conclusion. So, different narratives, different viewpoints they have taken up. And first, they are analyzing who are the ones who have given these viewpoints. Then, what they are doing, they are taking data. And they're analyzing all these things, whether these things hold true or not. So we will understand the narratives, then we will look at their findings, we look at their analysis. And finally, there's a conclusion part as well. Right? So the entire caste system we will try to understand here in the next few minutes. So let's get started. Now, what are some of the narratives related to caste? Again, those who don't understand the meaning of narratives, I'll just give you an example. Narrative means the way by which people are connecting some events and they're coming with a conclusion. That is a narrative. Something has happened and they are trying to analyze it and they are saying, okay, this is how all these things happen. That is a narrative. Example here. Some people will say caste is a way by which different groups are arranged in terms of status. So this is a narrative. So if you look at the caste system, you'll find different groups. Some groups are considered superior. They're considered to be having superior status. Some groups are considered to be having inferior status. And then there are some groups in the middle. So as per people who believe in this narrative or who propagate this narrative, caste system constitutes of different groups placed in hierarchy on the basis of status. For example, Brahmins might have higher status. Kshatriyas might have lower status as compared to Brahmins. The Vaishyas will have lower status as compared to Kshatriyas and Brahmins. Shudras will have even a lower status. So there is status hierarchy. So caste system is nothing but a hierarchical arrangement of groups on the basis of status. So this is one narrative. So there are different thinkers who have looked at caste from this perspective. Then there are some other thinkers who say that caste is a system of exclusion and exploitation. So the caste system excludes people. Caste system exploits people. Caste system leads to inequality. Those who are at the lower position in the caste hierarchy are not provided access to different kinds of resources. They might not be allowed to access water from common drinking water facilities. They might not be allowed to access education facilities. So it is excluding certain members of the society. It is also a system of exploitation. Those who are placed lower in the caste hierarchy, they're exploited. Different kinds of injustices are meted out to them. So some thinkers look at caste from this perspective, that caste is a system of exclusion and exploitation. Some thinkers will say that caste is changing. It is transforming. The way caste was in the past, it's not the same now. There are different factors at play. The government has come up with so many policies after independence till now. And because of these policies, society has been re-engineered. The way society was divided, it has changed. Those who would have been in the lower caste, over a period of time, they have become They've moved up the social hierarchy, maybe they have become affluent, or they have changed their position in the social hierarchy. So there is transformation happening. Then there are some people who will say that caste is a social construct. Who are these people? There will be some people who will say that caste is something which did not exist in India, but Britishers, they carried out different kind of census. They started identifying people with caste. When they are carrying out the census, they're asking people, okay, which caste you belong to. As a result of which, caste and other things became more predominant. And when the government right now, it also identifies people on the basis of caste, caste identities become stronger. It leads to polarization. So some thinkers will say that, again, if you are looking at people from this lens, it leads to, again, polarization, it leads to different kinds of divisions. Whatever divisions are there, they're getting reinforced now. Again, those who are discussing, those who are against socioeconomic caste census, they will also look at it from this lens. So what I'm saying is, all these kind of viewpoints are prevalent in the Indian society. In fact, some of these things you might also have discussed with your friends, with your family members, or again, people around you maybe. But what we will do, our analysis will be slightly more detailed. We are trying to do an academic literature review, or we are going to do an academic interpretation of these things, right? We are not going by some commonsensical notions, so as to say. So we will look at evidence, we will look at research, and accordingly understand each of these narratives, right? Who all have talked about this, and whether these narratives hold ground or not. And then we will link it with the analysis, the findings of the paper, right? So this is what we are going to do step by step. So first one, caste as status hierarchy. Some thinkers have talked about it. The caste system is nothing but different groups being arranged on the basis of status. For example, Weber mentions that society is divided or classified along three axes: power, wealth, status. And caste system is nothing but status-based stratification. Louis Dumont also talks about something similar. Louis Dumont says that Indian society, one of the underlying principle is the concept of pollution and purity. This is what Louis Dumont says, right? If you look at Indian society, it is governed by the concept of pollution and purity. Certain kind of activities are considered to be pure. Certain kinds of objects are considered to be pure. Certain kind of activities, objects, practices are considered to be polluted. And the Indian society tries to ensure that the pure and the polluted, they are segregated. And again, this is something which is found in the social dimension as well. Certain groups are considered to be ritually pure, certain groups are considered to be polluted. Those who are considered to be pure are at the top of the hierarchy, those who are considered to be polluted are at the bottom of the hierarchy. This is how segregation happens. So, caste as status hierarchy, this has been mentioned by both Dumont as well as Weber. But now, let's do a critical analysis. Does it hold true in the present context? See, these studies, again, 1980, 1958, long back, they have come up with this thing. In the present context, how much of this is true? See, for example, Dumont, right, when he is talking about the Indian society, he's talking about the pollution purity principle. Most likely what he will be referring to, he will be referring to some of these Vedic traditions. And he's considering them as ageless, that things will not change over time, or things have not changed over time. So, maybe something existed in the past, maybe in the Vedas or somewhere. But the situation might not be same at the present. And also, if something is there in these books, the Vedas, not necessarily the same will be happening in the society at that time. And even if it is happening over years, thousands of years, practices might have changed. The underlying values, norms might have changed. So, again, there can be different kind of questions raised, right? Whether it is just a system of status-based arrangement. Also, most of these findings, right, they're not talking about modern India, urban India. In urban India, you cannot maintain all these things, pollution purity principle. People have to travel in the same buses, trains, people have to work together in the same office. How will they maintain all these caste distances? Right? So, in modern India, urban India, all these things might not even be feasible. So, that is again another criticism of these kind of narrative. But there is a usual consensus, generally there's a consensus that the society is differentiated. Society is divided into different categories, into different communities, different groups, on the basis of cultures, customs, etc. Right? If you look at Indian society, there are different caste groups, and all of them will have their own customs, practices, etc. But this differentiation, does it translate into a hierarchical arrangement? That is the question. Right? So that is something which needs to be looked at. Devesh Kapoor, they're saying that over a period of time, the status-based stratification is becoming weaker. Right? This is the last one. Over time, rituals, food habits, stratification on the basis of that has become weaker. Right? So Dumont and Weber have a particular analysis, but some of these things can be questioned. Their findings can also be questioned, their methods can also be questioned. Now the next narrative, caste as a system of exploitation and exclusion. Caste has been linked with occupation. Traditionally, that has been the case. So the caste that you are born in, you have to take up the occupation of that particular caste. Traditionally, that was the case. So if you are born in a particular varna, you have to take up that particular occupation. If you are born in a particular jati, you have to take up that particular occupation. So there is a link between caste and occupation. And there is a linkage between occupation and income. Caste, occupation, income. There is a link. So if you are born in a particular caste, your occupation will be decided by the caste, and again your income will be decided on the basis of occupation. So indirectly what we are trying to say here is, income of individuals will be decided on the basis of caste they are born in. If someone is born in a caste of, let's say, barber, they have to take up the occupation of a barber, they have to work as barber, and whatever the barber earns, right, more or less that person is going to get the same amount of income. So indirectly what is happening is, access to different kinds of resources, income levels, all these things are dependent on caste. So this is how the caste system looks like. And this is one of the fundamental features. But how much of this is true in the Indian context at the present? Does this continue to exist even now? Does caste decide your occupation even now? See, over a period of time, definitely things would have changed. Not necessarily people are now taking up job as per their caste identity. But for certain kinds of occupations, you will find there is massive amount of correlation. So if you look at government jobs, 60% of the jobs of sweepers is carried out by members from the scheduled caste community. 60% of the jobs of sweepers. What is their proportion in the population? It is very less. But 60% of the sweeper post is held by scheduled caste members. Right? So why is this? Why there is this amount of overlap? Apart from that, Deshpande, Thorat, they also study that caste and economic status, they are linked with one another. Another way to look at it. See, if you think of inequality, inequality happens at two levels. One is inequality of opportunity. For example, you don't have equal access to different kinds of opportunities as other sections of the population. Different castes will have access to opportunities, but it will not be equal. Members of certain castes might have higher access to different kind of resources, maybe access to a loan, maybe access to education, maybe access to business ownership, maybe access to land. It might vary. Members from the scheduled caste community, their access to land is very low as compared to the upper caste. So here what is happening, if you look at opportunities, some members, right, certain castes, they are lagging behind. If there was equal opportunity, right, then again they're starting from the same level and they can compete with other castes. Just imagine it like this. There's a race which is going to happen. Some members, for them, right, they're starting the race from a different point. Like, let's say there is a race, right, these are the tracks. Some members have to start the race from here. Some members have to start the race from here. And the finish line is same. Right, so this is an example of unequal opportunities. Right, someone has to struggle more, someone has to struggle less. So if you look at all these data points, access to land, education, capital, some castes lag. They're lacking opportunity. Another way to think of it, maybe there's all same, right? So maybe the starting point is same, finish point is same. But it might happen that some individuals, right, they have access to better resources, better training facilities, better tools, so many things, better physiotherapists, better trainer, and some others don't have it. So you don't have equal opportunities. So same thing happens here, right? So some castes lag behind when it comes to accessing opportunities. But there is another inequality as well, inequality of outcome. Now, what is this? It might so happen that all the different castes are having equal opportunity, but that did not necessarily translate into similar outcomes. For example, maybe there was a policy according to which everyone is having access to education. Those who are from the lower caste, those who are from the upper caste, everyone is having equal access to education. But the outcomes can vary. And this is what, as per their study, it points out. How is this the case, right? How come the outcome is different if the initial input is same? Initial input is same, but maybe there is some form of discrimination. Maybe there is some form of institutional discrimination. As a result of which, the outcome is different. Maybe, let's say, you got equal education facilities. But maybe in the market, there are people who are different. If you're from a particular caste, you're not hiring. So as a result of which, your ability to get gainfully employed is less. You will have lesser incomes. Your ability to get promotion will be less maybe. So inequality of outcome means maybe opportunities are same, but outcomes, the opportunities are not getting translated into outcomes. Right? So sometimes highly qualified members of lower caste face economic and social discrimination. This is what Thorat and Newman they find out in their paper in 2019. So caste as a system of exclusion and exploitation refers to this. There can be inequality of opportunity, there can be inequality of outcome. The next one, caste in transformation. When I was talking about the linkage between caste and occupation, right? Caste decides your occupation, caste decides your job. At that point of time, some of you would have definitely had questions. How come caste is deciding occupation in the present context? So again, that's the reason. This is also important. Caste, the way it was in the past, yes, caste and occupation, they were linked with one another. But now caste is changing. A lot of people, a lot of thinkers have actually pointed this, that the way caste was in the past, it is no longer the same. The caste and occupation might not be linked with one another at the present context. Over a period of time, things have changed. What are the factors which have brought about these changes? Maybe land reforms. Because of land reforms, sharecroppers, now they are landowners. Most likely they were from the middle caste, but over a period of time, their position in the caste hierarchy changed. Also, handicrafts and other things, right? So they are not the market for handicrafts, the market for handloom. It has shrunk over a period of time. There is globalization, there is mechanization. So those castes which were traditionally carrying out these activities, weaving and other things, they no longer will be doing these activities. So they have to move to some other occupation. So as per their caste, they had to carry out these activities. They would have been artisans, they would have been again working in the handloom sector, handicraft sector. But because of change in economy, because of change in technology, they have to leave their traditional occupations. So again, the linkage between caste and occupation is changing. Apart from that, the modern professions that we have, the modern jobs that we have, right, they require high levels of education. And not everyone can do that. So for these jobs, you need again a larger set of candidates. So again, these new jobs that are emerging, right, engineer, doctor, chartered accountants, anyone is equally eligible to enter into these professions. Right? So even someone from the lower caste who was possibly not allowed to carry out some of these activities in the past, or maybe these things did not even exist as per the traditional jati system or caste system. Now you can take up these occupations. So some professions, they have these requirements for technical qualifications. That's what is happening. Also, the concept of dominant caste, Srinivas, certain peasant castes, they have numerical superiority. If they have large numbers, what will happen? They are electorally very significant. They will be the ones who will be selecting the candidates for elections and other things. So they are numerically superior, they can have political economic power. Right? So maybe you are from a lower caste community, but over a period of time, you are the dominant caste. Reservation, affirmative action. All these policies, again, have brought about changes. Members from the Dalit community, members from the scheduled tribe community, they are now in different kinds of professions within the state government, within the union government. Some of them would have got education in some of these leading institutions, and they might be at the top of top positions in the private sector. Also, migration, movement of Dalits from non-traditional occupations, that has also been seen, and this is something which Devesh Kapoor finds out. So, what we are trying to say here is there is massive transformation happening. It's not that exactly occupation and castes are correlated with one another. There is a transition happening. The last narrative that we have, caste as a social construct. What is the meaning of this? Those who talk about this narrative, they say that because of the colonial powers, who started understanding India, who started collecting data about India, who started noting down the caste status, caste was strengthened over a period of time. So caste identities became stronger, right? So since they gave importance to the caste system, it became stronger. It led to caste mobilization, it led to caste polarization. So the distinctions that exist between people, it has become stronger over a period of time. So this is again another kind of narrative perpetuated by certain thinkers. So now we talked about host of things, right? I just want to recap all the four narratives that are there. First one, caste as status hierarchy. Caste system means you have different groups which are arranged in terms of status. Some have superior status, some have inferior status, right? That is the hierarchy that you have. Caste as a system of exclusion and exploitation. Caste creates inequality, inequality of opportunity, inequality of outcome. There is a linkage between caste and occupation. If you look at the data also, certain kinds of occupation, you will find predominance of people from a particular caste community. So caste and transformation talks about how caste system is changing, how the linkage between caste and occupation is gradually changing. Caste as social construct talks about how, because of colonial powers, because of the way they looked at Indian society, caste identities would have become stronger, it would have become strengthened, right? Mobilization, polarization on the basis of caste would have increased. So these are some narratives. Now, what is the finding of Sonal Desai, right? What are and Mr. Dubey, right? What they're trying to look at and what they have found. So let's, and again, it's not that only their findings they have talked about, they have also referred to some more analysis related to it. First thing, caste, social distance, relations of subordination. So let's look at each of these things one by one. So first of all, caste, social distance, subordination, what are some of the findings? Professor Devesh Kapoor from Johns Hopkins, now he says that over a period of time, this idea of solution, purity, right, which we talked about, caste, status, hierarchy, ludum, it has become weaker. You will find the social distance that people used to maintain, it has gone down. Now he looks at lower caste members going to upper caste weddings. In the past, again, they used to maintain distance. The upper caste members will sit somewhere, lower caste members will sit somewhere else. Now all those things are not happening as per Dr. Kapoor's finding. Apart from that, there has been an increased tendency of different caste groups to assert their identities. Right? So they're trying to assert identities, they are talking about their own ethnicity. They're also trying to create narratives about their own origin. In the past, right, some castes they were considered to be inferior in the ritual hierarchy. Right? So they will not be asserting themselves. But now they are talking about their own origin. They're feeling proud about it. So this is again another change. On top of that, there have been different political developments, right? The policy of affirmative actions and other things. On top of that, you have regional political parties, again, which will take into consideration different caste-based alignments. So caste, status, dimension, all these changes are happening now. Ritually, inferiority, and all those things might have become less significant. And if you look at the data, the participation of Dalit members, the participation of Adivasi members in different kinds of civic and political activities, elections and other activities has increased. So those communities which are traditionally deprived, they are now participating in greater numbers in these activities. So this is one transformation that is happening. And again, there is political incentive as well, right? If they are participating in all these activities, those who are coming to power, right, they have an incentive to address to their vote bank. As a result of which, they might get some policies in return, which will prefer them maybe. So caste as status hierarchy, this is what is the change, right? Caste members are now asserting their identity. Caste and inequality. So here again, things have not changed. According to the data, also they find this out. When it comes to the Dalit members, when it comes to the Adivasi members, right? So when it comes to accessing education facilities, when it comes to their household incomes, household expenditure, all these things they are lagging behind. They're less likely to own land. They're less likely to have years of education, fewer years of education. All these things are there. So when it comes to inequality of opportunity, they are lagging behind. Also, there is difference between their wage and salary incomes. Inequality in terms of outcome is also there. So both kind of inequality persists. Inequality of opportunity, inequality of income. So what they're trying to study here is, if let's say some caste and some lower caste and some forward caste, right, if they're put together, if they're coming from the same socioeconomic background, is there a difference? They find out that yes, there is a difference in that case as well. Difference, if there's a difference, it implies that there is inequality of outcome, and that is what is being reflected here. What about persistence of caste inequalities? Caste inequalities exist, but do they persist over a period of time? Here they have some interesting findings. What they're saying is, there is greatest inequality in developed villages and smaller cities. If you look at India, you will have small underdeveloped villages, you will have developed villages, I mean slightly more advanced villages as compared to where there is no facility, you will have small towns, and then you also will have metropolitan cities. So in India there is massive variation. What they found is, in developed cities, or in developed villages, and in smaller cities, you have massive amount of inequality. Lower levels of caste inequality is there in least developed villages and metro cities. Isn't this interesting? Least developed villages, smaller cities, advanced cities, metropolitan cities. Maximum inequality is at the middle. Lower inequality, lower inequality. How is this so? So something from economics. In economics, there is a concept called as Kuznets curve. Now in Kuznets curve, what does it say is, if you analyze incomes per capita and inequality, at lower per capita income, there is lower inequality. As per capita income increases, inequality increases. And as per capita income increases further, inequality goes down. Similar kind of thing is happening here as well. Initially, the small villages, underdeveloped villages, least developed villages, incomes are very low. There's not much inequality. But as there is development, as incomes increase in these villages, as these villages become developed, or there is a transition, these become cities now, incomes are increasing. But who is able to take the advantages? Who is able to take the maximum share of these things? Those who are some of these privileged communities, maybe some of these privileged castes. And over a period of time, there's a transition to metropolitan cities, right? When it is becoming a metropolitan city, again, the caste differences decreases, right? So as incomes begin to rise, the benefits are going to privileged classes, privileged groups. And once it becomes metropolitan, this caste-based differences decreases. So this is something which is counterintuitive. Least developed villages, low inequality. Metropolitan cities, low inequality. In between, whenever the incomes change, these benefits are now being taken over by the privileged class. Caste as a social construction. Now this, again, usually people talk about that, okay, because of the colonial power, because of the way they looked at the Indian society, because of the importance that they give to caste as a group, our society, caste is, people are mobilizing on the basis of caste polarization is increasing. So now what they do is, they look at data among forward castes. Those who are not Dalits, those who are not Adivasis, they look at the data of forward castes. And forward castes will include the Brahmins and some other castes, for example, Kshatriyas, different communities within Kshatriyas. And here also they find out that among the forward castes, there is massive variations. Among the forward castes, again, Brahmins will have maximum access to education, employment opportunities, etc., as compared to the other forward castes. So if all these things was constructed by the colonial powers, right, and it did not actually exist in reality, then how come there is a difference between Brahmins and the other forward castes? So the conclusion drawn here is, maybe politics, maybe there are political factors at play, but all these things also reflect that there is massive amount of inequality between different social categories. So this is what they are finding out. Right? Again, if I have to recap, the first one, when it comes to status, maybe caste as status hierarchy, the impact has gone down. People are now asserting their caste identities. Caste and inequality, now also inequality exists both at the level of opportunity and the level of outcome. Persistence of caste inequalities, it also continues, but again, the way it is slightly different. Least developed villages, metropolitan cities, caste inequalities are lower. Developed villages undergoing transformation, smaller cities, inequalities are maximum. And caste as a social construction, again, it is not necessarily, caste has not necessarily been just created because through colonial powers, there are multiple dimensions at play. For the last part here, I know I'm taking a lot of time here because I wanted to go in details because there's something that would have come again, so better to focus here. The last part here, the analysis of all these things. So in the 21st century, how do you visualize caste? Has caste become insignificant? Have the economic forces taken up? Or does caste exist here? First thing, see, if you look at access to opportunities, caste plays a role. If you look at outcomes, here also caste creates inequality. So access to productive resources, education skills, dominated by caste. If you look at the personal domain, 95% of the marriages take place within caste, same caste. This is also the finding from the same study. So now also people get married within the same caste. So caste exists. But at the same time, the economy is changing. Caste is closing the society, but at the same time, economy is opening up opportunities. So how are the dynamics at play? What is the linkage between a closed system like caste and an open system like the economy? So how things are panning out? See, economy might be creating opportunities, but you have a social institution that is a caste system. And it leads to a variety of ways in which castes manage to shape access to social, political, and cultural capital. It's not that everyone has equal access to social, cultural, and other kind of capital. Caste does play a role. I'll give you an example. In different parts of India, you will find different caste-based associations. They will run hostels, they will run different education institutions. On papers, everyone will have access to these institutions. But again, there will be preference given to those who are running these institutions. You also have caste-based scholarships. I mean, these institutions will provide scholarships. These are all not government institutions, these are all caste-based bodies. So you'll find different hostels in many places, right? And I don't want to name any particular caste, many castes do that, especially those who are the privileged caste. So this is how, again, access to education and other things can be dominated by certain members. Look at finances. Many caste communities, right? They will be running cooperative banks, for example, or they will be running different kinds of informal mechanisms by which they help financially the members of each caste, their own caste. Look at banks in India, again, dominated by certain community, Saraswat, Brahmins, right? So indirectly what is happening is economy is creating opportunities, but not everyone can equally access these opportunities. Already there are some caste groups which are maybe privileged. Over a period of time, they have become even more privileged. So those communities which have been lagging behind, it becomes very difficult for them to catch up. So in sociological parlance, this is called elite capture, the way by which different communities capture all these elite institutions. So this is how caste looks like in 21st century. Caste is definitely changing, but there are some elements which are still at play. People still give importance to caste in certain aspects. For example, when it comes to marriages and other things, but still caste is a closed system. Economy is out there, economy is open, but economy, the way you are able to access economic resources depends to a large extent on which caste community you might belong to. So this is how caste looks like in the 21st century. Different kind of narratives we looked at. We looked at all of these things in details. Now, this is something which you can use in your answers because it's a rigorous study by some of the most prominent scholars and it refers to some of the prominent scholars. Right? So again, intentionally I gave more time to this because again there are multiple overlaps, multiple places you will come across these things.